Idi Amin. The former dictator of Uganda was a man of many contradictions. Born in 1925, Amin rose from humble beginnings to become one of the most infamous leaders in modern history. His rule was marked by extreme brutality, yet he managed to maintain a facade of charisma and charm that baffled many. He was a brutal tyrant who oversaw the deaths of hundreds of thousands of his own people. His regime was responsible for widespread human rights abuses, including mass killings, torture, and forced expulsions. The impact of his rule left deep scars on the nation of Uganda, scars that are still felt to this day. Yet he was also a charismatic person who could charm and disarm even his harshest critics. His larger-than-life personality and unpredictable behavior made him a subject of fascination and fear. He had a knack for using his charm to manipulate those around him, both within Uganda and on the international stage. But perhaps the most bizarre aspect of Idi Amin's personality was his fascination with Scotland. This fascination was not just a passing interest, it was an obsession that influenced many of his actions and decisions. He admired Scottish culture and even adopted Scottish symbols and attire in his public appearances, and in a move that was met with ridicule across the world, Idi Amin declared himself the King of Scotland. Before we explore why he did this and how, let's take a look at his background, his early life, his rise through the military ranks, and the factors that led to his eventual seizure of power. Understanding his background is crucial to comprehending the complexities of his rule. It will examine his complex relationship with Scotland and the reasons behind his self-proclaimed title. We will look at how his fascination with Scotland influenced his policies and public image, and what this reveals about his personality and leadership style. This relationship is a key to understanding the enigma that was Idi Amin. Finally, it will consider the cultural impact of Amin's rule and his lasting legacy as one of the 20th century's most notorious dictators. We will explore how his actions have shaped Uganda's history and the world's perception of dictatorial regimes. His legacy is a complex tapestry of horror, fascination, and lessons for future generations. Idi Amin Dada Umi was born in Koboko, a small village in northern Uganda, in 1925. His exact date of birth is unknown, as is much of his early life. Amin's family belonged to the Kakwa ethnic group, a small minority in Uganda. Amin received little formal education and joined the King's African Rifles, the British colonial army, in 1947. He was a physically imposing man, standing at 6'4" tall, and he excelled in the King's African Rifles. He was a skilled boxer and rugby player and quickly rose through the ranks. Amin served in the British Army during the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya in the 1950s and gained a reputation for both his bravery and his brutality. By 1962, when Uganda gained independence from Britain, Amin had reached the rank of Deputy Commander of the Ugandan Army. He used his position to amass wealth and power, and in 1971, he seized control of the country in a military coup, deposing President Milton Obote. Amin declared himself president of Uganda and promised a return to stability and prosperity. However, Amin's promises proved to be hollow. He quickly established a brutal dictatorship, banning all political opposition and ruling by decree. Amin's regime was characterized by widespread human rights abuses, including extrajudicial killings, torture, and disappearances. Amin also implemented a series of disastrous economic policies that led to hyperinflation and widespread poverty. One of Amin's most notorious acts was the expulsion of Uganda's Asian population in 1972. This decision shocked the world and had far-reaching consequences for both Uganda and the expelled community. The Asian population, primarily of Indian descent, had been living in Uganda for generations, contributing significantly to the country's economy and cultural fabric. Amin accused the Asian community of exploiting the country's wealth and gave them 90 days to leave. He claimed that their departure would return Uganda's economy to the hands of native Ugandans. However, this decree was more about consolidating his power and diverting attention from his failing policies. An estimated 80,000 Asians were forced to flee Uganda, leaving behind their homes, businesses, and possessions. Many of these individuals had to start over in new countries with little more than the clothes on their backs. The expulsion created a humanitarian crisis as families were torn apart and lives were uprooted overnight. The expulsion of the Asians had a devastating impact on the Ugandan economy, which relied heavily on their entrepreneurial skills and business acumen. Shops and businesses that were once thriving were now empty and abandoned. The sudden vacuum left by the expelled community led to a sharp decline in economic activity, causing widespread hardship for the remaining population. He also targeted members of his own government and military, as well as anyone he perceived as a threat to his rule. This included political opponents, intellectuals, and even members of his own ethnic group. His paranoia and ruthlessness knew no bounds, leading to a culture of fear and mistrust. It is estimated that between 300,000 and 500,000 people were killed during Amin's 8-year reign of terror. The legacy of his rule is one of pain and loss, with countless families still mourning their loved ones. Memorials and mass graves stand as stark reminders of the atrocities committed during this dark chapter in Uganda's history. Section 5. The Scottish Connection. Despite his brutality, Amin remained a popular figure in some quarters, particularly in the West, where he was often portrayed as a buffoonish but harmless eccentric. Amin cultivated this image, appearing in public in outlandish costumes and awarding himself a series of grandiose titles including His Excellency President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, CB. However, it was Amin's self-proclaimed title of King of Scotland that truly captured the world's imagination. Amin's fascination with Scotland is thought to have stemmed from his admiration for the country's military history and its resistance to English rule. He also reportedly developed a fondness for Scotch whiskey during his time in the British Army. Section 6. A litany of titles. Amin's claim to the Scottish throne was, of course, entirely without merit. However, he seemed to revel in the absurdity of it all. He often wore a kilt and sporran in public, and even proposed moving the Scottish Stone of Scone from Westminster Abbey to Uganda. Amin's other self-proclaimed titles were equally outlandish. He declared himself the conqueror of the British Empire, despite never having fought against the British. He also awarded himself the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor, for his service in the King's African Rifles. Section 7. Exile and Impunity. In 1979, Amin's reign of terror came to an end when he was overthrown by Tanzanian forces and Ugandan exiles. This marked a significant turning point in Uganda's history, as the country began to recover from the brutal regime that had caused so much pain and suffering. The combined efforts of the Tanzanian military and the brave Ugandan exiles were instrumental in bringing down one of Africa's most notorious dictators. Amin fled to Libya, where he was granted asylum by Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi, known for his own controversial rule, provided Amin with a safe haven, allowing him to escape the immediate consequences of his actions. This move was met with international criticism, as many believed that Amin should have faced justice for his crimes. He later moved to Saudi Arabia, where he lived in exile until his death in 2003. During his time in Saudi Arabia, Amin lived a relatively quiet life, far removed from the chaos and violence that had characterized his rule in Uganda. Despite his exile, he remained a figure of significant interest and controversy, with many people around the world continuing to call for his prosecution. Despite numerous calls for him to be brought to justice for his crimes, Amin was never held accountable for the atrocities committed during his rule. The lack of accountability for these actions remains a painful and unresolved issue for many Ugandans and human rights advocates worldwide. Amin's death in exile sparked mixed reactions in Uganda and around the world. For some, his passing was a moment of relief, a final end to a dark chapter in their nation's history. For others, it was a reminder of the justice that was never served, a symbol of impunity that continues to haunt the memories of those who suffered under his rule. Some mourned the passing of a leader who they believed had been unfairly demonized by the West. They saw Amin as a nationalist who had stood up to foreign powers and sought to assert Uganda's independence. These supporters often pointed to his early efforts to improve the country's infrastructure and economy before his rule descended into violence and repression. Others celebrated the death of a tyrant who had brought so much suffering to their country. For them, Amin's death was a chance to finally close the book on a period of intense hardship and fear. The celebrations were a testament to the resilience of the Ugandan people, who had endured so much, and yet continued to hope for a better future.